Yes, of course I was waiting. Well, I would like to welcome you all to this evening's meeting between the respective boards, the Hooksett School Board and the Pinkerton Academy, members of the Board of Trustees. My name is Linda Johnson, and I've had the privilege since 1992 to be outside general counsel to the school. I will apologize in advance. I happened to get laryngitis right in time for this meeting, so I sound a bit scratchy, but I'll do the best that I can. The purpose of tonight's meeting was actually to have a discussion. As you may know from your own board meetings, that there have been some discussions between Pinkerton as well as the Hooksett School Board about entering into a long-term sending agreement contract. Pinkerton's board thought it might be a good idea to have some direct conversations with the boards. And I would like to start off actually to have each board member just state their name from the boards, starting with Phil as the superintendent, so people know who you are.
Phil Littlefield, Superintendent of Schools.
Sarah Myrtle, Counsel to the Hooksett School Board.
Tricia Corpus, Chair of the Hooksett School Board.
Cheryl Axton, School Board Member.
Phil Danbo, Hooksett School Board.
Dave Pearl, Vice Chair of the Hooksett School Board.
Thank you very much. And likewise for the Pinkerton Board, if you could introduce yourself, starting with Mary.
Mary Anderson, Headmaster.
Harry Byrne, President.
Bob Gorham, First Vice President.
Wayne Boland, Trustee.
Brenda Keith, Second Vice President.
Now there are actually more Pinkerton Board of Trustees than that, and also with us today is Tim Butterfield, who is sitting in the audience. So what I wanted to start off with is to ask, we have a tentative agenda, which will be that the Pinkerton Board will give a presentation of some history of the long-term sending district contracts and why Pinkerton's board would like to have Hooksett become one of the sending districts to the school, followed by a presentation from someone from the Hooksett School Board to likewise from, I think, Tricia Karsko, the chair, to give a presentation on their thoughts on entering into a relationship, and then have an interactive discussion between the boards about any questions that they might be able to ask of each other, followed at the end by some, if there are members of the public who had a question or wanted to make a comment that they would like the boards to consider. So I would like to start off with, I will point out that Mary Anderson has been the headmaster of Pinkerton Academy for 11 years, having been at the Academy for a total of about 39 years. So Mary, if I could ask you to begin with the presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to share some history about sending district contracts and other information, including why Pinkerton wants to be Hooksett's anchor school. I will speak to what a long-term tuition agreement affords Hooksett and the purpose of the one-year enrollment agreement that may be necessary to bridge a long-term agreement. First, I would like to highlight some of the details of the long-term tuition agreement that Pinkerton has offered Hooksett and why certain provisions are important to Hooksett and Pinkerton. First, the agreement is for 10 years. As Pinkerton is aware of the fact that choice is important to Hooksett, Pinkerton also understands that it's important to have a, quote, high school of record, or as the RSAs refer to, a high school maintained by the district. In the first 5 years of the proposed long-term contract, there are provisions in the contract that would allow all but 75 students to have the choice of where they will attend high school. After the 5 years, Pinkerton proposes that all of Hooksett students attend Pinkerton. We do understand, because of the geographics and other issues, that some students may want to attend other schools, which is why Pinkerton has proposed that up to 10% of the total Hooksett student population could opt out or attend another school. The reason that this provision is important to Pinkerton is that we need to plan for the number of students who will be attending so that teachers can be hired and maintained, and more importantly, programs can be maintained. A stable enrollment equals stable programming, and it's all about opportunities for students. There are many things that a 10-year tuition agreement affords Hooksett, including up to 2 foreign exchange students at no charge to the district every year. Hooksett School Board and Pinkerton trustees will meet at least 3 times per year so, quote, the trustees can have the benefit of suggestions and recommendations of the Hooksett School Board on curriculum, financial matters, and policies of the academy. When at least 90% of the students are attending Pinkerton, there will be 2 trustees who reside in Pinkerton appointed by the Board of Trustees. The Hooksett superintendent will be able to attend 3 meetings annually with myself and the Pinkerton administrators to discuss matters of curricula, facilities, programs, or services. The middle school administrators will meet at least 3 times a year with the Pinkerton administration to again discuss curricular programs and services. The Hooksett lead teachers or department heads in specific disciplines will meet with Pinkerton department heads and our Dean of Academic Affairs to review what changes the district and Pinkerton are contemplating or assessing, and at the same time assess the potential impact on our students. It's all about the transition of students to their high school and how they are prepared to enter that high school, and this is one of the most important parts of the contract, the coordination between our 2 districts on programs for students before they enter Pinkerton and then continue on at Pinkerton. That's just a very brief overview of some of the details and important facts about our contract.
Likewise, Tricia, would you like to make an overview of Hooksett Board's view of the long-term contract?
I'm Tricia Corcus. I'm the chair of the Hooksett School Board. There are usually more people at our regular meetings, so I don't know why I'm so nervous coming in an auditorium and standing up, but I am. The Hooksett School Board wanted to come and have a face-to-face negotiation session because we're concerned about the 10% number at the 6th year mark, and would like to negotiate that either to be 1, a higher number, or 2, that we renegotiate at this 5-year mark of what the percentage is, because our community is very diverse and we have geographical issues with how far Pinkerton is, and our community needs the opportunity to mend from our previous relationships and forge a new one, but at this point in time we're concerned that the 10% number would not pass on a warrant article, and our ultimate goal is to make sure if we bring to the voters a warrant article, that it is a warrant article that we feel can pass our voters.
So at this point, what I'd like to do is to open it up for discussion if Sarah wants to join in at all in moderating the questions. I understand from Pinkerton's perspective, you would like the Pinkerton to be what is being called in Hooksett the anchor school. It's kind of easy to think of it as the anchor school versus the satellite schools, which are the districts within which you're having some shorter-term memorandums of understanding. Do I have that correct? Yes. Okay. So to be the school of record or the anchor school. And is there a history to the 10% that has been selected by Pinkerton?
The 10% is the amount that's in all of our sending school district contracts with Hampstead, Derry, Chester, and Auburn. And we feel, and I think you feel the same if you become a member of our community, that having contracts that are consistent is very important, so that every school district is treated the same. And the 10%, and that's a historical number we've had in our contract since the early 60s.
My understanding, however, Mary, is that the 2 other districts, Hampstead and Chester, actually have 5%, and Derry only has the 10%. So Derry, as a larger school district with needs of its schools, wanted to have a larger percentage to be able to go elsewhere.
That is correct. And as far as student size, Hooksett would be about the size of Hampstead, so they do have just a 5% opt-out, and that's worked well. Very, very, very few students opt out.
And again, I think from now having worked with Pinkerton, and again, I'm happy to have Sarah stand up here to say her perspective. I know that the 10% was in recognition that you did have more students than perhaps the 5% that the other comparable districts would have, and a concession to you that rather than asking for 5%, which was in the other districts, they would go to the 10%. So I understand from your perspective that you have a concern that the 10% may not be accepted. And do you have any background to provide to us as to why that might be? Why might the 10% not be acceptable?
I think I'm on, yeah, I'm on. So one of the concerns we just actually spoke about a little while ago was in the contract currently, we'd actually like to define what the 10% actually is. We had some discussion with Sarah about that where David and I, everybody was kind of tossing out what, because obviously in those first 4 or 5 years we'll have, you know, a minimum of 75 here and other kids elsewhere. So ideally, if it was 10% of the whole high school population, which was in the agreement, that would leave us a very limited number, because it would be eaten up by the kids that are already out of the district. And then the other one is obviously, we are thinking more in line with some percentage of the 8th grade class coming in versus the whole high school population. Makes more sense because it's more definable. Like if you read the contract currently, you really don't know what the 10% means. So again, if the attorney from Pinkerton or somebody could define that, I think that would be great.
Okay, I will address to someone on Pinkerton. Can you define what it is that you have always intended in the contracts to be the 10%?
Okay, first of all, in the contract that has been proposed, the 10% does not kick in until the 2018-19 school year anyways. And historically, I will tell you that if students have started in another school district, it is best for them to finish where they are. So in 2018-19, if a student was already, let's say, in Bow or as a sophomore or junior or senior, it's only logical to leave them there, and that I'm sure would be acceptable to our board because it's always been our philosophy that it's better to not transition students during the high school process.
So that is something that is not in the agreement that you were provided with, but in hearing from your counsel some of the concerns you had, Pinkerton has met 3 occasions, and in this latest occasion addressed that and would be willing to make that concession that if there are students at the time that it should transition to the 10%, which is similar to the other sending district contracts, they would be willing to add in the provisions similar to your MOUs, which is if there is a student already in another district and the student chooses to stay in that district, that they would be allowed to do so, and that then the 10% would not include those students, so that that would be exclusive of them and it would just be the remaining student population, if that helps.
So 2 things. We had actually talked about that, and I think obviously any school board, you know, I think that's a great thing. Obviously, we actually voted earlier this year because we have some kids that are in different districts this year to make sure that those kids finish there because you don't want to disrupt their education by moving them elsewhere. So that is excellent. I guess what I'd like to do is maybe work some real numbers and talk about, I mean, if we said for the next 4 years, let's say, if we had 75 or 100 kids out, then when our freshman class went in, how many kids would be able to opt out? Because again, Tricia stated at the beginning, so we have kids in North Hooksett where it's a long commute, especially like Northwest and Northeast, that we're concerned about. We also have the factor where we obviously, because of last year, we have quite a few kids in Londonderry, which, you know, we have the sibling factor, which we talked about the other night, where, again, you have parents that will maybe have to commute a kid to Londonderry and a kid to Pinkerton at the same time, which would obviously be a nightmare. And then there's also the other factor that obviously we wouldn't be here if we didn't want to be Pinkerton members, but we also have the fact that we're going to have die-hard Manchester folks that love Central and West, that obviously over time they'll transition out, but a 10-year time frame, I think, whether it be loyalty or tradition or whatever, you're going to have folks, and that's why we've put these MOUs in place and have the negotiated agreement with Manchester currently, so that those folks can still attend there as well. So again, that's just why the 10% seems rather restrictive to me, and then why I'd like to work the scenario so we talk about it and actually how many kids would be able to opt out once that 10% number kicks in. I'm sorry, I don't mean to monopolize the floor here.
No, we appreciate the dialogue and the questions. Is there someone who would like to address that?
If you look at the enrollment for Hooksett as of this school year, there are 618 high school students at about 10 or 11 different locations. So if we were to calculate the 10%, it would be based on the total 618 students, when that 10% comes into effect in year 18, 19, or after those students that are currently at the other schools finish.
I have a question. In that 618, are you considering those students who have already opted to go to a private institution, or are you only considering those schools that are those students who are going to public school?
The 618 that was given out at the last meeting, I just had it a second ago. I believe that is all students, Phil, because it included Trinity as well, right? So it would be on the total high school enrollment wherever they are.
And actually, if I can just because I sense where some questions may be from the Hooksett board, is just to clarify the 10%, as we understand, as you've just described it, is of the total high school population. So in the 5th year of the agreement as it's written, if, for instance, there were 600 total high school students, whether or not some of them may have gone elsewhere, it's still 600 total high school students. So there would be the 10% opt-out would be 60 students as of that date. But there would be the students who were attending other districts at the time of that opt-out that would continue on there. But there would be only 60 additional, and that's the total high school population. So you'd have to somehow clarify between freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors, but it's only 60 total. I just want to make sure for our board's clarification if that's the case.
Brenda?
But I think you would have to back out those that Linda just articulated wouldn't be included, who had already started their education elsewhere under a memorandum of understanding with Londonderry or Bow or so forth. So when you were calculating the number, you'd have to back those out.
So I think that that's also a change from what had previously been discussed. And it was in recognition to what we subsequently learned your concern was, which is, well, in the 5th year, you're going to have students who might be sophomores, juniors, and seniors, freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, the seniors will be graduating, who might want to stay in the district where they're at. So this actually gives you the flexibility, not only in the first 5 years of the contract, where Pinkerton is not requiring the 10% opt-out, but then in the subsequent probably 3 years, there would also be not a true 10%, because you would back out the students who may also choose to be staying in the districts that they're in. So the 10% would be that difference. And I think between lawyers we can come up with a definition that defines that. But do you understand that concept?
And I understand that children that are going to another school would be left in the other school. I guess I just want to clarify the calculation. So in year 5, if we had, say we have 600 students total, and we have 300 students that are in other districts because of the progression that we've gone through. So now we're going to calculate for next year. So 10% are we taking 10% of 600, meaning that 60 kids from the 8th grade class could opt out? Or are we saying we're taking 10% of 600 kids, but we already have 300 placed? That's, I think, where the confusion comes, is how would that 5th year freshman class be calculated? I realize that after time, it would all even out to be 10%, but I think that's where there's some confusion.
I believe what we're talking about is that if your total high school population was 600, as you stated, 10% would be 60. That would be 60 new freshmen would have opt-out. They can go wherever they want to. The 300 you already have in other high schools through your MOUs would remain there. So you would really be putting out 360, and we would get the balance of those students.
I think that is much more to our favor, but I think the contract certainly needs some work because it's confusing to read that, because our concerns were that we might have no opt-outs that year because we were at 50% because of the placements that we previously had. Thank you.
But I think I disagree because it says 10% of the total school population, not 10% of freshmen. So out of all the students.
That's what he said. He said that his high school population was 600.
Yes.
10% of 600 is 60. Those students who are already in the MOU
Right.
stay there. That's the 300 he mentioned. So, in effect, 360 students would be in MOUs.
Okay.
The balance would come here.
Okay. So under that transition year, yes. Then once it transitions out of the MOU students, then it would only be 10% of the total student population.
So if that
So
were
after
the case,
5, 6, 7, 8 years.
so so that fifth year class, we'd have 60 options. And say we exercised 10 of those options, then we would, depending on how the class went, we would maybe have 50 options and so forth. But you're not counting anybody that's out year 1 through 4. Is that correct? Anybody that went out year 1 through 4 is not considered opted out. It's only really starting at year 5 that you're going to calculate based on from that year forward. That's what I think we need to clarify in the contract, because as we were reading it, we didn't see that.
It wasn't in there because it wasn't a concern that was raised until after we had provided it, where your council raised it to us, Pinkerton addressed it, and so they met and they are agreeable to that kind of a change in clarification language.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes, I have a question. If in your, when you consider the total population, are you considering the total population of those students, including special education students, and any student that would experience a manifest educational hardship and use JCA to opt out because there was a manifest educational hardship?
Yes. Whatever your district says is its population of high school students, 9 through 12, is what the 10% is based on. Where they go for their education is through your MOU, special education. We take that into consideration.
Mary, did you have something to add?
I don't think that was the question. I think your question was, if a student needs special services that we cannot afford them here, they do not count as part of the 10%, and that's in the language of the contract, because the language of the contract says that we will offer education to all, I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but it says to, in essence, facilities and programs that a student that can be served with special services or something like that. But it never includes those, because that's...
If Pinkerton does not have the facilities or programming needed for that particular special education student, no, they would not be counted in that number. Any other questions from...
Linda, I could clarify that it's in the agreement, and it says special education 504 accommodations to enroll district students. It is the Academy's intention to provide schooling for educationally disabled and exceptional students, not requiring special schools or special facilities. In addition, the Academy will, at the request of the district, offer facilities and programs comparable to those by public high schools of like size. So then special ed would not be included.
Other questions? Yes?
So following up on David's scenario, so let's just use round numbers, I guess, right? So we're talking about in the first 4 years of the contract, 75 kids go to Pinkerton, and then the rest of the kids could opt out if they wanted to. So let's, and again, so our class this year is like 168 kids, but let's say 175 just to make the numbers round. So this first 4 years, 100 kids could go out, and 75 would attend. That fifth year, was just clarified, it'd be about 60 kids based on a population of 600. So if we had 60 kids come that year, in the subsequent year, in the sophomore year, if we already had 60 and our population is still 600, does that mean no kids get to go as sophomores? I mean, none of the subsequent freshman class get to go because we already burned up the 60. So in
I
other
don't
words,
understand your question.
Yeah, I'm
The
sorry.
contract says up to 75 students. So let's say just 75 here, you've still got to find facilities for the other 100 students. So if Londonderry did take 40 and Bowdoin to take 10, that's still 50 kids unaccounted for, essentially.
Right.
But let's take round numbers. If you say 175 in the class, let's say 100 come here, 9th grade, 100 come here the next year, 9th grade, 100 the next year, 100 the next year. We have 400 students here now. The other, however many students have decided to go elsewhere, they finish wherever they are.
Correct, and that's not, again, maybe I'm not being clear. So, again, I understand that concept, so, but moving on to what David spoke about, and Harry just answered a couple minutes ago. So, those kids would be grandfathered, their education would finish where they're at. Now we're in the 5th year of the contract, where we're talking about where it goes to 10%. So, in that year, let's say just by, chance, we have 60 kids that opt out, which is our full 10% amount. And so then the next year, our full high school population, we had talked about our school population is 600. That number doesn't change. So if we've already used up 60 slots, that subsequent year, there's no slots, right? That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to get to.
It appears correct pursuant to your calculations, and I think on a year-to-year basis, the school, I'll allow somebody here to speak to that, but the school would do a calculation of how much your total student population is, how many were allowed on the flexible opt-out where they didn't count, and how many slots would be left for the remaining 10%. Is that correct? So it's a year-to-year calculation?
Right, but when the graduating seniors, theoretically, I would think that it would be enough.
Because you would have students who had graduated, and you would have an influx, and so it remains to be seen what whether there would be new slots open.
Yeah, I guess, I do, and just to clarify, I think, and what the explanation is that, so you have you use the 60 slots that first year. The next year, the number of slots depends on how many of your kids have graduated that use those 60 slots. So if you use your 60 slots to go elsewhere, but none of them graduated from those other schools, then yes, you're not going to have, and the total enrollment numbers stay the same. You're not going to have any more slots. But if 40 of them graduated, because most of them were in senior class, then you're going to have a lot more slots. So that's going to vary depending on which classes are at what stage of their education.
And I will say, my experience with Pinkerton is that it is a very cooperative working relationship with the sending districts. And there have been occasions where Mary Ann has mentioned to me, although not speaking to the specifics, where a particular student, for whatever reason, it was not appropriate for that student to continue there. And so in the best interests of that student, the districts and Pinkerton recognized the issue, addressed the issue, and made the determination that the district could find an alternative placement for that student because it was in the best interest of the student. Now that's not memorialized in an agreement, but we understand that when you're working with children, best interest is always prevailing. The 10% is an attempt to create a high school of record with the sending districts, allowing flexibility to districts, but also creating some parity between the various sending districts that they have. So 10% is the highest opt-out that Pinkerton allows. David?
I'd just like to go over that number again because I just lost Sarah on one part of it. So if we're in year 5 and we're all done with the 75, so we're kicking in the 10%. So we have 600 students, so we have 60 opt-out slots. If we took all 60 of those opt-out slots in that freshman class, then we'd move to the next year. I don't think we'd gain any because those graduating seniors weren't counted as opt-outs because none of our opt-outs would graduate for 3 more years because we opted them out as freshmen. So the ones that are graduating were not from say another school, they were covered under the MOUs. So really, if we wanted to be fair, and this would be on our end, we would have to look at 15 kids a year to keep a consistent number so that we weren't prejudicing one class with opt-outs and not the other, because if we gave up those whole 60, we're locked in unless there's somebody moves out of district or something like that.
I'm seeing a head nod over here from the headmaster, so I'll let her address that.
I think your calculations are correct. That's right. If all 60 were the first year in the 5th year of the agreement, the students that were at other schools would just finish at other schools, but you wouldn't be able to the next year add to that 60 because it would be 60 totally. Yes, I agree with you on that.
Any other questions or comments or considerations you would like Pinkerton to?
Well, I'm confused by some of these numbers. And to accomplish the end, if the Hooksett board were amenable to that 10%, we haven't established that they are, would you not achieve the same end if starting with 2018, giving that date out of his proposal, that you identified that percentage for the freshman class? Meaning, in 2018, all but 10% of the freshman class would come here. 2019, all but 10% of the freshman class would come here. And then over that 4-year period, don't we transition out the youngsters in MOUs and achieve that 10% in a way that the public would understand it? And therefore, David's calculation of about 15 per class makes some sense.
I agree with Phil. I think the end result would be the same because if it's 10% the first year at 175, it would be 17 and 17 and 17 all the way through. So that doesn't add up to 60. So this must be, 175. Well, it's about 175 would be 700 high school kids, and that's so basically your concept is right.
But am I incorrect in thinking that if you only attach the 10% to the incoming freshmen, it deprives of a student in their sophomore, junior year who chooses to opt out for alternative reasons to be part of the 10%? Because what I'm hearing was just 10% of the freshman class, rather than 10% of the total student population.
But if you go 10% for 4 years, it's 10% of the total. It's still 10% of the total at the end, right? I'm a finance person, and I think it's 10% of the total, but you go 4 years in a row.
Okay. All right, so you're asking the board to consider the 10%.
The one difference, I think, for discussion would be in mid-year, if, say, 2 Hooksett students transferred out of Pinkerton. In the big calculation, they would have used up 2 slots for the incoming freshmen. If we do strictly freshmen, it is more to our benefit because you're basically not counting those 2. If you're saying, just 10% of the incoming freshmen, you're pretty much ignoring if people want to opt out. And that's okay with me, but I just for discussion, I think that's where the difference comes about going to just freshmen only or the whole school population. Because we haven't really discussed that issue. If we assign, and we're going to assign 75 kids to come here, or all but 10%, what if there's a transfer? That skews the next year's number. So I think we should just think about that. I like the freshman class number better because I think it's more to our advantage.
I think that's realistic, and I will tell you, after working here for 39 years, the one thing is, every single decision, always and forever, is what's in the best interest of the kids. It's all about the kids. If it came down to those 2 students, I can tell you right now, the administration and the trustees would work with you. And that's the assurance I will give you on my professional reputation working here for 39 years, that would happen. We wouldn't get down to the 2 students because, as Linda explained a few minutes ago, There are at times certain circumstances, for whatever reason, maybe it's a kid that just couldn't cope with a large school, or another student who had issues with another student, maybe a restraining order, that happens a lot in today's world, maybe a restraining order against another kid and couldn't stay here. We always make those decisions based on what's best for all the kids, so we would absolutely do that. And I have to tell you, with the opportunities here, with the 335 courses and the CTE curriculum right on campus, there is something in my mind for every student. So I do believe when it comes down to it, if I could predict into the future, which I know I can't because I don't have a crystal ball, I do think that most of the kids are going to because of the opportunities that we have here, which are, in my mind, vast. So I think that's going to happen, but we will absolutely work with you.
One thing that's been agreed upon in this board, that it's a fine institution, but I think we want to be upfront that we're in a transition, and we may have we may have somebody that comes here, and for whatever reason, they opt out after they've been assigned. And I'm just pointing out that under the whole school percentage, that would take one slot away from that freshman class, because fair to you, you're now saying that child is opted out, is going to another place. So we need to think about that it's not really 60 divided by 4 is 15. It depends on what the path of those students are, and that could vary at 1 or 2, as they move up. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
And I think you know as well, perhaps everyone doesn't, but Pinkerton's other contracts only provide for the opt-out. In recognition of what was represented to you by your superintendent and by your board chair and legal counsel, that there were concerns about immediately going into an opt-out. That is why there's the provision to say for this period of time when you have MOUs with other districts, Pinkerton will honor that concern that you have for your citizens and your students by allowing that and not requiring that. However, at some point, we hope the decision will be, yes, this is your school of your district, and therefore, as is similar to the other contracts that will eventually take over. And again, hopefully your students will want to be here, but we recognize that.
I would say for myself, as a person who's not supporting the contract because of the 10%, and to be forthright, I don't know that some of our issues go away in a transition because of geographical things that are not going to change. We have a lot of people that are on the border with Bow and in the north end with Pembroke. So I think you might call it a normal situation. It might be an easier transition, but I just don't want to misrepresent our community. If it were just getting used to a different school, I think that's true. But some of these factors I don't think are going to change, and we're trying to predict how the community is going to accept this and so forth. So as a school board member, I don't want to misrepresent our position and say that I think we can get to 10% in 5 years, because I really have some serious doubts that that's going to go over with our community. I think that the 75 is very reasonable, and I appreciate the offer and the exception that you don't have in another contract. And I respect your 10% and I respect your institution. I'm just trying to anticipate what Hooksett is going to feel about that and how as a board we are going to manage that number. Thank you.
And I think in response to that, likewise, it won't be for just 5 years based on what has been discussed here and what the board discussed after it provided you with that. It's going to be more like 8 years, because there will be the additional 3-year period when the students are already in other schools under their MOUs, and those students will not be counted. So it will be a longer period than just the 5 years.
So went over that last calculation. Unless we stayed at 15 a year in year 5, we're going to disadvantage our own children, because if we use up our slots, then we're not going to equally be able to hand them out.
But I think it was starting with the given of the 600 students. The 600 students would have backed out of it the students who are already in MOUs for previous years. So that number is probably going to come down to, maybe 400 students, if I understood your position correctly. Is that correct?
That's the way that we see it.
Right.
And the other thing, I'm just looking at this too, you want to remember this is a 10-year contract, so we're going to be in year 5 before the opt-out kicks in. You're going to know by year 5 So you're going to have 5 years left of a 10-year contract to say, okay, this is not working. So that's when it would, you know, make other arrangements.
Yeah. I just want to be clear though, because I thought we cleared it up that, you know, in year 5, going back to the example of 600 students, we have 60 slots to opt out, and if we used all 60 of those in that freshman class, we would be done. So from our perspective, to be fair to our classes, we would probably only want to give 15 opt-outs so we can consistently have 15 opt-outs a year. So I do think that the restriction practically kicks in year 5 for us. I know we could do something different, but that would jeopardize our position of being fair with our students and consistent. So from my perspective, it really is year 5, although the numbers we could front load that if we wanted to.
I think that's fair, and I think it would require some further discussion, perhaps with council, to try to arrive at something that may be acceptable to both on that. But I think we understand that concern.
So I have a question. Currently at year 5, we're going to the 10% of either our total population, grandfathering those students who are already under an MOU. Would you consider not starting the 10% until year 6, because we currently have 5-year MOUs with that we have approved of with 2 other districts?
Let the board speak to that.
We should probably speak with Linda about that. But I think that that's something that we would discuss as a board and certainly consider it, take it under advisement.
It's not something that the board has voted on, but I think that it's a valid concern that they would give good consideration to, and we would get back to you about that. I think it's a reasonable request.
Okay, thank you.
Hello again. A couple of points. So I think, again, with Tricia, moving it back to the, an additional year, and Mary, to your point, I guess my thought process is obviously the school speaks for itself. Great school, like David said. I don't think anybody has any concerns about the education their child's going to get here. You guys have great facilities, ton of programs. Item number 1, so Lisa, I guess we were talking about, so I think of these MOUs, they're somewhat transitional, but like David said, there are going to be some folks that are geographically challenged beyond that 5-year period. The MOUs, even though they're not tuition contracts, my thought process is that they're not necessarily a temporary bridge. There'll be people that want to be able to use those beyond the 5 years, and who knows what happens if we renegotiate with a new board, etc. So that's one point. And then also, again, to the school speaking for itself, if we talk about the fact that the kids are going to love it here, and we talk about, again, being very liberal with the first bunch of years, allowing a bunch of kids to opt out during this transition period. But I don't see what's wrong with, again, just talking about the fact that having in the agreement that we sit down in 5 years and look at what's occurred, and negotiate then and talk about the 10% or whatever number we're going to get to. But we have a better track record then. We really, like David said, we're really trying to guess. We have a lot of different interests in our community, a lot of different folks coming in. And again, it's not the fact that Pinkerton is not a great school. I obviously think it's a great school. My son's here. But again, those distance limitations aren't going away from the north end to Hooksett. And again, I think the school speaks for itself. If we get to 5 years and we just talk about the fact there's a clause in the contract that says we'll rediscuss or we'll talk about the number of kids that can opt out, I don't think that's unreasonable.
Is there someone on the board that would like to address that?
I'd just like to address the distance. We have done a geographical layout of Hooksett and where the students currently live and who would be moving from the furthest points. We have students coming from great distances now. East Hampstead is a long ways away from here, 20 some odd miles. So, but we do have a number of students who do transport. But in the event that, let's say, one of those students was located real far away wanted to come here, I'm sure that we could work with the parents and make some kind of an arrangement, whatever it is, to accommodate that particular student. But like I say, our students come from a number of communities, and there are great distances that they travel. I know it from my own personal experience. My kids came 12 miles to here. So, you know, the distances are very...
Just to a little bit further on that one, it's my understanding that the furthest north, the students will be attending Pembroke and Bow, most likely. I think those are the two biggest concerns from what I understand. And the Londonderry is no different than Pinkerton, so the distance geographically is the same from Hooksett to Londonderry, Hooksett to Pinkerton, relatively the same. So it's really those students, from my understanding, at the north end and towards the Bow end that you'd be concerned about. And to be very honest, 60, I think looking at the geographics as we have, we looked at the 8th grade geographics, that wouldn't be an issue. So I think that's pretty safe to say.
In the number, Mary?
Yeah.
In the demographic?
Yeah.
In that northern section?
Yeah. And I don't have it in front of me right now, but I'm just recalling it. There was that the biggest majority of the students were 20 minutes away or less. Very few were more than that.
Yes.
Hi, Mary. Thank you. I just want to add a little bit to this discussion. It's not so much just about distance. Talking to the constituents in Hooksett, a lot of it's really just a personal choice of either the children or their parents. There's a lot that goes with each parent's decision. Some of them are based on traditions that have been built up for 100 years. Some of them are, they're familiar with a certain school district. You know, I'm a great example. I live on Hackett Hill Road in Hooksett. I mean, Bow is in my backyard. We toured Bow, and it was a great facility, great school. My son just didn't like it. There was something about it, and he just couldn't put his finger on it. It just wasn't something for him, so we kept touring different schools. So it's more than just the mechanics of a distance that you can plug into an equation. You know, it's human beings, and it's parents making decisions with their children about where they're going to go to high school. And you know, we've all been through high schools ourselves, and that's a big part of your life. That 4 years is a big part of your life. It's a big decision. Most of us, I think, grew up in communities where we didn't have to make a decision. It was easy. You lived in a certain area, you went to this school, period. You know, so Hooksett's really challenged. I mean, I think challenged in most school districts around because we have so much choice, and it's almost too much choice. But the people have grown used to it. They like it, and it's going to be very difficult to take that away. So that's just some input.
And I hear also in the question, in the comments, why can't we just have this 10-year agreement, but agree in concept we'll revisit it in 5 years? In essence, you don't have, you have a 10-year contract that is what it is, and if the Hooksett board decides not to make a change in 5 years, Pinkerton has a 10-year contract. So I think the issue becomes, do you want a long-term contract with a school like Pinkerton, or do you want a short MOU, a satellite school district like you have with Londonderry, etc.? In which case, at the end of the MOU, you can reconsider it. But Pinkerton's belief on behalf of the board was that the best arrangement was to have a long-term contract with the district. So therefore, the option of reconsidering after 5 years doesn't really have any contractual meat to it. And so it's either, do you want a 5-year MOU or do you want a long-term contract? Pinkerton is hopeful that we can bridge the gap for all the concerns you're raising in a way that would be acceptable to you, and therefore you could take it to your voters to let them decide. And I don't know if there are any comments.
I'll comment on that and the fact that basically most of our contracts were 20-year contracts, and we wrestled with the idea of a 10-year contract, quote, as a long-term contract. When you figure out the phase-in, your MOUs and what have you, you really only have a contract that's binding in the last couple of years. Because by the time that you've exhausted your MOUs, there's only going to be 3 to 4 years maximum left in the contract, which is 10 years in length. So again, we want to accommodate you as much as we possibly can, but we will have to realize that we do have contracts standing right now with other communities. And we are a nonprofit organization, and our only product is education, making students capable of performing at the collegiate level in the industry. And if you look at our course catalog, which I know you all have, you will see that the broad spectrum that we offer here provides that for even the least of our students, the opportunity to excel.
Any other questions? Yes.
So Harry, along those lines, again, I love the school, but I just, at the end of the day, just because of our specific situation, and again, I know you were just saying like only 20-year contract, 10-year contract. I just think, again, it'll be tough for us to get past the voters. It isn't really, at the end of the day, what we all like. It is to get it to the voters, but to get it through the voters versus like, we're talking about obviously doing a tuition agreement, and I guess there's, and obviously making sure kids that are slated to attend here can attend here after that, whether or not the agreement goes through. But for us to feel that it's going to pass the voters, I think the 10% will be a tough one for us. And again, I'm an advocate of the school, but I just think going from those numbers, even if we come in with somewhere in between, or something a little bit better, again, I'm not saying there's a line in the sand or whatever, but again, at the end of the day, I want to do something that's going to pass the voters and hooks it. And I just think, we were talking tonight, David was talking about like, doing the math, et cetera. It sounds like we've kind of hashed that out. But again, at the end of the day, 5 or 6 years from now, only 17 kids can go elsewhere. In the next 2 or 3 months, we're going to have to go out there and discuss that with folks. And I don't think, and I'm going to say glasses half full, reasonable guy, but I think that going from the number that we're going to have to that number is going to be a problem. That's all.
And I would like to just thank you for having the opportunity that, to consider us. And I in no way mean to criticize your position. I think it's a very wise position. You're a nonprofit organization. Part of what we face in Hooksett also is that 5-year point kicks in for us. We actually have more opportunity available because as we've looked at declining tuition, declining enrollments, some of these other satellite schools predictably will be providing us more opportunity. So for some of these people that are interested in Bow or Pembroke or Londonderry, at the exact time where we have to change from 75 to 15, I think those schools may be offering us more space. And that puts us in that difficult position of trying to figure that out. But I in no way want to say that we don't appreciate Pinkerton or don't think that you're doing a great job with educating kids. We're just trying to answer all the questions and try to make sure that we're very clear about what these numbers mean and what the expectations are. So thank you.
Any other comments or questions by Pinkerton? Any other comments or questions? Comment?
I tried to prepare my thoughts tonight before we came to just take advantage of this opportunity to share with you kind of what's going on in my mind and what I'm hearing from my constituents. Something you said, Mary, I almost felt like there's a wave running across this room and you and I picked up on it. Because you said, it's really struck me, you said, it's all about the kids. And you said, after 39 years, it's always been about the kids, every decision you make, and I really appreciate that. And I'll tell you right there, that one statement rings so true with Hooksett parents. So already, by you saying that, that's a great sign. The thoughts I have, and I apologize if they're too long, they're 2 pages, but I want to share them with you. Headmaster Mary Anderson, distinguished members of the Pinkerton Board of Trustees, and my fellow Hooksett School Board members and Superintendent Littlefield. We are here tonight in Derry, New Hampshire, within the walls of the great Pinkerton Academy, communicating on the beautiful stage of the Stockbridge Theater, at a moment in time that will never come again, will never be the same, and the decisions made by our collective boards will change the lives of many children forever. It is up to us then, collectively, tonight, to ensure that those children's lives change for the better and not for the worse. Let me explain by first asking you a question to contemplate without giving me an answer, but just to ponder about. The question is this: would you actively do something in your position as a headmaster, superintendent, member of a board of trustees, or community school board that would cause complete chaos and destruction of neighbors' lives and the community and cause them to fight and argue excessively? I believe that most of you would answer no to that question. Unlike our neighbors in Auburn, who live in a close proximity to Pinkerton Academy and Derry, New Hampshire, are a town of approximately 5,000 strong, and who spent 2 active years making their decision and move to Pinkerton Academy from Manchester, New Hampshire schools, Hooksett is different. We are a community of approximately 14,000 who live further away from Derry, New Hampshire and Pinkerton Academy, and have spent relatively no time educating and informing our community about the wonderful resources that are available to Hooksett's children at Pinkerton Academy. We recently went through a very difficult mediated settlement with our neighbors to the south, Manchester, that was very costly to the Hooksett taxpayer for over $1.2 million, including a 20% increase from $8,500 to $10,200, with an additional punitive $200,000 that we had not budgeted for and had to take from our K-8 programs. That payment, however, gave Hooksett children and families the freedom to seek education for school beyond the walls of Manchester without concern of legal challenge from the city of Manchester for doing so. The Hooksett School Board is now contemplating another relationship with Pinkerton Academy, where Hooksett would enter another long-term contract with restrictions, including conceding to a guaranteed number of students to attend Pinkerton Academy and guaranteeing those numbers in the form of payments to Pinkerton Academy. You are about to be responsible for one of 2 things with regards to the long-term Pinkerton plan and whether or not it will pass or fail at the ballot box in Hooksett, New Hampshire. If the school board signs a Pinkerton contract with any restrictions, whether it's 75, 25, or 1 student in the first 4 years, and then 90%, 30%, 15%, 1% guaranteed enrollments of Hooksett children in taxpayer dollars for 6 to 10 years, then the Pinkerton contract is doomed to fail at the ballot box in March, and we will be responsible for creating the chaotic event of Hooksett children assigned to Pinkerton with a failed Hooksett Pinkerton contract, and it would be many years before a successful campaign to join Pinkerton and have the Hooksett citizens back it to be organized. If, however, you stand with us, the Hooksett School Board, with a contract that has no limitations, but guarantees Pinkerton for their budget planning reasons, number 1, a date of their choosing, say October 1st, where Hooksett provides the number of Hooksett students that will be attending Pinkerton Academy for the upcoming year. Hooksett will commit to this number no matter if the child leaves Pinkerton during the year or not. Number 2, Hooksett will commit up to 2 buses for the first year, and then based upon the increase or decrease over the next few years, will adjust the buses accordingly. However, transportation will always be supplied to our second anchor school, Pinkerton, to provide fair and equal educational opportunity to our 2 anchor schools. The reason I believe so strongly in this approach is because it is the only one that will pass at the ballot box, in my opinion. We don't have the luxury that Auburn did with 2 years to educate the public. We have parents and children with strong ties to Manchester schools, Londonderry, Bow, Pembroke, and a few other schools. as well as those attending private schools that will not want to see the tuition rise, and then the elderly and taxpayers who don't have kids in the system that will say, Manchester's fine. If you really want to do something for all the children, and I wrote this ahead of time, that's why it was so prophetic when you said that, Mary, including the Manchester kids and all the kids from Derry, Chester, Auburn, and Hampstead, please do the right thing. Stand shoulder to shoulder with me tonight, and we can get this done, not just for Hooksett kids, but for all the kids. This model will lead the way in the state of New Hampshire, as well as around the country. You have an opportunity to be part of it, or we will accomplish this in the next school board session after the March elections. Then you will look back and realize that you failed to grab the opportunity when it was in your reach, and folks will look at us with disfavor. The plans B and C, if Pinkerton won't or can't, because of reasonings with your contracts, budge towards a zero restriction policy, is potentially a memorandum of understanding for the 8th grade class, because we have a significant amount of children who are very stressed out along with their parents right now, want to be assured that they can come to Pinkerton, New Hampshire. And I would hope that you would want to welcome that, and that would be the first batch of Hooksett students that can get the word back to the rest of them to basically brag about Pinkerton. And the second plan B, if you will, plan C, would be that the superintendent and headmaster work out an agreement simply committing the 8th grade class members who want to attend Pinkerton the right to go there for the next 4 years while we continue to negotiate the long-term contract. Think about it with some serious thought. Make motions to amend your contracts and set free those few in your community that would prefer to go to other schools. And show the world that Pinkerton Academy is strong enough to stand on its own without mandatory minimum enrollment numbers. Nelson Mandela passed away most recently, and the world continues to mourn a man who put the children of South Africa's needs before his own. I respectfully request that you put the children of Derry, Auburn, Chester, Hampstead, Hooksett, Manchester, Londonderry, Bow, and Pembroke's needs before our own, and approve a contract with Hooksett, New Hampshire with no restrictions, and join us to lead the state of New Hampshire and the country to a brighter tomorrow for the children across our great country. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? No? Any other comments or questions? Well, we did want to provide those of you who drove over here to Pinkerton to listen to the discussion between the two boards, if you have any questions or comments that you would like to make. And there is a microphone in the center where you're welcome to have a comment, a question. Our first speaker, and what's your first name?
I'm Mark Messina.
Hi, Mark.
I'm a Hooksett resident, and I don't have any prepared statements, so I just want to ask a question. If it's not Pinkerton as an anchor school, how do you plan to provide transportation to all of these MOU schools that you want to provide choice to? Because that's a big problem with Pinkerton is transportation, and it's a big problem for anybody who wants to go anywhere but the anchor school.
Someone from the board want to answer that?
So I was just informed that the board has agreed just to talk about the Pinkerton contract tonight. Is that true? Correct?
The purpose of this meeting, I believe, with the Pinkerton trustees was to talk about the Pinkerton contract, yes.
So I don't know if you were able to hear that, but the purpose of tonight, and it was agreed between the two boards, would be a discussion about the long-term contract with Pinkerton. So accordingly, I guess it would leave for your own board meeting to be able to ask that question. So
Okay.
my apologies.
I'll leave you with one statement. When you're left with Manchester as your only anchor school, and all those kids who want to go to those schools of choices, they have no way to get there, and they can only go to Manchester, that'll be on you guys, Dave and John. Thank you.
Is the next question related to the long-term contract with Pinkerton?
Yes, hi. My name is David D'Orizano. I live at 9 Herrick View Drive, Hooksett, New Hampshire. So I think what I heard here tonight representing the contract renegotiations that Pinkerton honestly appears to have listened to some of the concerns that were brought back to them from perhaps original negotiations or contracting. I thought the first 4 years was incredibly favorable to Hooksett. It gave us the opportunity to really, test the waters. It's something that seemed unprecedented, actually, to give us the flexibility to have approximately, 50% of our students be committed to other schools around the various towns and districts. There's been a lot of talk about, as we get past the 4th year into the 5th and beyond years, and just by looking, none of us nor they can predict the future, right? So we don't know year 5, 6, 7, 8, and beyond how many students are going to want to go to other town districts. So we have to make a decision based off of the best known information that we have. And the way to do that is to look at some of the existing numbers and past numbers. So looking at some of those existing and past numbers and reading into some of those numbers, I think will help us to understand what to do regarding a decision to put in front of the voters the option of Pinkerton. An example here, and we talked about the long distance that some students would have to travel from northern Hooksett. And according to our own numbers, we have sent to Bow High School. So those would be the most northern Hooksett residents. This year, no students. Last year, 1 student. The year before that, 2 students. The year before that, no students. The reason we have approximately 46 students going to Londonderry is because the conditions at Manchester School were just intolerable for those parents and students, which resulted in parents looking to flee the Manchester School District at all cost. What occurred at that stage was we approved 46 students. And Londonderry at that time opened their arms and said, you would not have to pay any more dollars. We will match whatever you're paying to Manchester or somewhere around that. But your transportation needs would have to be cared for by yourselves. So the reason so many Hooksett students, I think, went to Londonderry were because of the conditions and the situation that they were in. Had there been a Pinkerton option on the table, I think that there were a fair amount from this 8th grade class that would, in fact, make the transition or switch from potentially fleeing a Manchester school to a Londonderry or other to Pinkerton. I just think it was, based on what I heard tonight, a situation, a contract situation, a negotiation that at this point seems very, very realistic, that the Hooksett taxpayers would in fact back a situation that gave us the flexibility that this appears to have for the first 4 years, and then the flexibility our 5th and 6th year has, where it's up to the school board then, based on what we'll see over the course of the next 4 years, which will now be more relevant data points to go on and see where the shift is between where students go, to realistically think that in year 5, we could have, yes, by the numbers, up to 60 kids going elsewhere. But I think what we'll see is there'll be a very strong shift based on the numbers that we have and the reasoning why Londonderry populated so many kids. I just think that this is just a fantastic contract at this point, now that we've gone back and looked at the next 4 years and the concessions and the contract that appears steady in front of us. I would urge the board to please pass this as is now with the conditions that have just been laid forth and lay out a very clear explanation to the taxpayers and allow us to vote. Thank you.
Next question, does it relate to the long-term contract? Would you like to comment on that? Comment on the statement?
Thank you. I tend to like to listen first before I give my input. I am not in agreement that this contract that has been presented to us and the amendments that have been discussed regarding clarification on the percentages. I do think that needs a little bit of work so that we're all more clear about what that means. I do believe strongly that this would pass our voters in March. I do think that Mr. Duranzo, as an example of one of our parents in Hooksett, are the majority of how they feel. I do think that we would be doing a disservice if we don't move forward. I just really wanted to not miss my opportunity to express that to the board and to my board as to where I stand on this contract.
Thank you, Sharon. Any other comments or questions on that comment? And next comment or question for either board having to do with the long-term contract between Pinkerton and Hooksett.
Yes, thank you. My name is Patrick Gosling. I'm from Hooksett. Thank you to both boards for having us here this evening. We've heard a lot about the contract. I guess my question would be directed to the Pinkerton School Board. We didn't hear much about the possibility of at least discussing a memorandum of understanding. I'm not making a statement one way or the other on what I believe will pass and won't pass in Hooksett. I know it's a healthy discussion we're having, but do you have any thoughts about an MOU, or is that something that you've talked about or would consider with the Hooksett School District and the Hooksett residents?
As someone on the board can address that?
Yes, we know what the MOU is with Londonderry and with the proposal for Bow, and we've looked at the language in those contracts, and we have not come to a conclusion yet. However, we do have it in review.
So I think they are considering it, and there have been a draft proposal submitted to legal counsel to do that. The preference of the Pinkerton Board of Trustees would be to have a long-term contract, but as a further assist to the Hooksett School District, are considering the terms of a MOU or an enrollment agreement of some sort. Any comments or questions by either board on that question? Okay, last person.
Thank you. My name is Todd Lazard. The question I have is, looking at this, well, I guess from the standpoint of fear of commitment, you could look at Hooksett from the position that they have now, is that they have an idea of maintaining 2 high schools, which is kind of a hybrid. And in that scenario, I mean, would you entertain the idea of looking at this as saying a percentage of our class based on the concept of the fact that we maintain, we'd like to maintain 2 high schools, which I think is different from anybody else. And the reason I bring that up is I've looked at the history of Hooksett, and because I wanted to track down this myth that we've had in Manchester as a 100-year service. And I've looked through town records back to 1958 and found that we actually used to split our class between Pembroke and Manchester pretty much close to equally. And then it slowly migrated more towards Manchester over time. But if we're looking at a happy medium where you have to maintain your agreements that exist, I'm just thinking that in this case, a district that maintains 2 high schools, is that a possibility? That's all. Thank you.
I guess I would first direct it to the Hooksett School Board, whether or not they would consider it, because it's not worth an answer unless you think that would be an option for you. Sarah?
Just if I can comment, just initial comments.
Can't hear you.
I can hear that one, so.
Okay, I think it's working now. I think just as an initial matter, should a tuition agreement be reached with Pinkerton, there really would be 2 high schools maintained. I think is contemplated by the current scheme, to the extent that the settlement agreement with Manchester duration is for until 2018, if I remember correctly. So in effect, there really would be 2 high schools maintained by Hooksett under that, under the scenario that it is now. Of course, Manchester would expire at the end of the 5-year period. So I'm not sure if I understood the question entirely, but in effect, that's what is in place with this tuition agreement.
Right, so under the separation agreement between Hooksett and Manchester, Manchester is required to accept any student assigned to Manchester by the Hooksett School District through the year 2018. And I'm not sure if the gentleman wants to get up to state, is that the answer to his question, or is there still a question remaining?
Well, I guess the way I'm looking at it is, I think it's the impression that our school board's going to negotiate another contract with Manchester. See, that's one of the things that I think some of the people on the board haven't even contemplated, that there's a termination end of that contract. And I guess the question is a lot of them think that there's going to be an extending contract that's going to happen and negotiate. And if that was the case, if Pinkerton was interested in, say, based on that, I'm just conceptually just saying, is it a 50-50 split? Is that what people believe? And because like I think it was just stated, they're talking about this agreement with Manchester as being a separation agreement, which to me means termination on the 18th, and I'm not sure if some people are facing that reality and should actually kind of factor that in.
Well, I can say that the Hooksett School Board has not approached Pinkerton about that concept. Pinkerton has been approached about the possibility for a long-term sending agreement, and the 75 number was proposed by Hooksett and accepted by Pinkerton, and have been working along that. And the alternative of the school board has requested of Pinkerton, would it consider a shorter term, it's called a memorandum of understanding, I would call it an enrollment agreement of sorts. And Pinkerton is willing to consider a shorter term enrollment contract. I hope that answers your question.
Good evening, Jim Nisho, Hooksett. When I heard Mary, you were talking in the beginning, you said the first 5 years is 75. And then at year 6 is when the 10% kicks in? All right, so it's not 4 years and then 6.
No, actually, as currently worded, as we originally proposed it, it was 4 years. And as was requested this evening, would the board be willing to consider to extend it through the 5th year? And the answer is yes, they are willing to consider that. But they would need to, since it's a portion of the entire board, that the entire board would need to vote on that. But I think that it would be agreeable to extend the 4 years to 5 years, so it would mirror the MOUs that you have with other satellite districts.
Okay.
Do I get that correctly? Yes. Okay.
Thank you. in the beginning, you also said that dairy has a 10% opt-out. What is the numerical count on that 10%, say, for this year? Like, how many dairy students are able to opt out today for a numerical count?
I think the enrollment is around 17 or 1,800, so it would be about 180 kids.
Okay.
That's just off memory, please. It's somewhere
I
around
won't.
there. I don't have my numbers with me right now.
In a contract, does the state education funding flow to Pinkerton in a contract versus an MOU, or does the state education funding, where does it go?
Hooksett School Board would still receive the adequacy money for every student attending Pinkerton. We get the tuition from Hooksett, and what's applied to them is all the adequacy money. We do not get adequacy money at all from any district.
Okay, so that basically the town of Hooksett School Board can use that adequacy money the way it currently uses it with Manchester. It could use it in a variety of different ways.
To offset the cost of tuition, I'm sure that's what their thought process is. I can't speak for them, but it's their money, not ours.
All right. Has Hooksett School Board applied that calculation? Has the superintendent's office applied that adequacy money to the terms of this contract, at this proposed contract? Mr. Littlefield?
I'm not sure I understand what your question is. The adequacy money is revenue. It's not available for the board to spend. It's revenue that offsets the tax rate.
Okay, it's general fund revenue then? It's not specific to high school student adequacy money?
No.
By choice or by law or rule?
Adequacy aid is adequacy aid. It's revenue.
Okay. Is there any, last question, has there been any consideration to working to that 10% number by year 10? Because my daughter's in 8th grade. I've talked to a lot of other parents, and at 15 or 17 kids per class, that's going to be really difficult in terms of this transition. And if it went to the vote today with just that 10%, I see a lot of difficulty with that vote. And I'll just put that out there as a rhetorical question for the Board of Trustees. And my daughter would love to come here. I want to speak very favorably of the school, but I also think of the rest of the residents in Hooksett. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question related to the long-term contract between the boards.
Yes, good evening. Mark Mio from Hooksett. I have a couple of logistical questions. Some things that were discussed at Hooksett school board meetings that, to my understanding, still have not been addressed. So if I could perhaps address the Pinkerton Board of Directors, and I want to thank them for their very professional demeanor tonight. We've not encountered that for some time in our own district sometimes, and it's a great source of frustration. So I want to congratulate you and thank you for your behavior tonight. Logistically then, with the 75 children who are assigned to the Pinkerton district if the contract passes, the question was raised earlier about budgetary logistics, was that if the 75 children, if there were not 75 children who chose to come to Pinkerton, budgetarily, is Hooksett required to still pay for any empty slots should we not reach 75 children?
I think pursuant to the contract, although it's not something we've considered, if it says you're sending a minimum of 75 students and you did not, there would be the right to invoke that.
Thank you. I just want to get that on record. Secondly, it's my understanding that, so is the Pinkerton district responsible for assigning children here, or is the Hooksett district responsible, the superintendent and the school board?
I hope this is going to be a joint answer between us, but I understand that the process that will be followed is that the Hooksett school children will be allowed the opportunity to pick their school of choice, whether it be Londonderry, Bow, Pinkerton, Manchester, or if there is another option provided to them. And that each, under the MOU, there's 40 per grade in Londonderry, 10 per grade in Bow, and as you saw in our case, it's up to 75 or all of the students can come here. It's not a minimum, it's 75 or all. should they run into and encounter a problem about maybe 12 students assigned to Bow, which may or may not be could be unlikely, then there is a selection criterion where the school board itself would invoke things such as, do you have a sibling there? Is there a programming reason or other reasons of that? But Pinkerton only has the choice to determine for special education purposes, do we have the facilities? Does Pinkerton have the facilities to be able to provide that? Or do they not have the program to be able to provide that? And I can't think of another reason why you wouldn't accept. So if somebody assigned here, Pinkerton would accept them under the long-term contract. It would be considered, Pinkerton would take all your students who wanted to go here. Now, I would like to speak because that's my interpretation of reading the various documents.
Sure.
I'd like to ask someone on the board to see if I was correct in that interpretation.
Yes, I'd just like to clarify that the Hooksett board has set up a criteria for placing children in MOUs, but we have not discussed, we've discussed, but not decided on a criteria for requirement for Pinkerton, or looking at it the other way, opt out of Pinkerton. So at this time, the board has not set up any criteria of how we would make the 75 if they weren't voluntary assignments.
Thank you.
That's correct. And to Mr. Pearl's point, that's a big point of contention at the school board right now, is how to fill the slots if the slots aren't not available. And I've been feeling that the derogatory comment is to force kids to go to Pinkerton. I feel that's a slight on Pinkerton, and I apologize for that if you've heard that. This is a great school, and whatever the parents decide, that's up to them, but I'm very pleased with what I hear tonight and what I've heard over the years as well. And I would urge the Hooksett School Board at this point to do more to reach out to the Hooksett parents and children now than they haven't done in the past few months, to reach out to them to find out exactly what the numbers are going to shake out at. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. As to the issue of being forced, I think typically how it works when a sending district decides it's going to be the school, a Pinkerton will be at school, is that they assign their students there. And then the parents affirmatively choose to opt out for whatever reason up to that cap. Am I correct?
You're correct, Mrs. Johnson. Also, to comment on what you just said, Pinkerton right now, with our facilities and with our staff and curriculum, we could accept 100% of your Hooksett students. But because of what they are asking, we're going to allow all of those students who go to MOUs to opt out. So that, I just want to clarify that we have the capacity right here at Pinkerton Academy to take 100% of your current high school population.
Do you have a comment, David?
Say that we have a meeting coming up on the 17th, so maybe we're getting into some issues here that this board needs to talk about, because I think what you're saying is absolutely correct, but if we pass this contract, we're in a unique situation where we have 2 schools of record, and this board has to decide how to deal with that. Then we have the MOU, so not to take up all your time with our conversation, but if we can try to keep this just to the Pinkerton contract, and then next week we'll be available, in Hooksett to really go over this stuff more.
And another question regarding the long-term contract?
I don't have a question. I have a comment. Thank you, Pinkerton and Hooksett School Board. I have a son that comes here. He's a 9th grader, and he's doing very well. I just want to say Hooksett values education, and the 10%, just get it done. We want to come here. Hooksett wants to come here. There's only a select few that is worried about the 10%, and education trumps all. And
thank you.
Get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like we have another question.
Comment and a question. My name is Dave McPherson. I'm from Hooksett. I thank both boards, the boards of trustees, the Hooksett School Board. The concern that I have in town right now is that we need education stability. This current year's 9th grade class had a very unstable situation last year with what was going on with Manchester and didn't know what was happening and where their kids were going to go and were we leaving Manchester, were we not. Now with the current 8th grade class, it's going to be freshman next year. We're almost into January. We don't know. The parents of 8th graders don't know right now where their kids are going. My oldest is in 3rd grade. My youngest is in 2nd grade. We need, as a town, we need stability in our town, and there's an opportunity here. What frightens me a little bit if we don't get a 10-year contract passed and we enter into an agreement with Pinkerton as a 5-year MOU, in 5 years when our 4 MOUs are up, where are we as a town? We've gone through, this is our 2nd year of instability. If the contract doesn't pass, we're looking at another year of instability next year. What's going to happen? My question is, if a contract is presented to the school board and Hooksett agrees that they're going to accept that and it goes to our voters and it does not pass, like John says, let's say it does not pass, where are we as a school for next year and the years to come? Thank you.
Again, if I can just address that, because I know between council we've discussed this, and it was discussed briefly today. While the purpose of this meeting was really for the tuition agreement, I believe there's a commitment from the Pinkerton board that in the event a tuition agreement is entered into between the boards, but it goes to the Hooksett voters and it's not passed, there's a commitment for enrollment for next year, and we don't have an agreement, but we have a commitment to make that agreement for the current students and the 8th graders who would be attending next year. So we can have that for the next year and continue discussions.
I think that Sarah represents that well. Any other comment from the board? That's correct. Question or comment about the long-term contract between the district and the board?
Steve Castor from Hooksett. Kind of a comment, maybe a question rolled into it. This litigation that ended the 20-year agreement with Manchester gave us the opportunity to come here and lay the cards on the table. Now, if we do not secure a contract with Pinkerton, we spent all this money to get out of that contract and to stay with the school that everyone was fleeing from. It just doesn't make any sense to me to pay the same money in Manchester as you would here in Pinkerton with the opportunities that are here and with the headaches and heartaches that are there now with budgetary things and teachers being laid off or whatever. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I just urge you to really consider this for the other children of Hooksett that are right on the bubble, because we were in this thing last year, and that's why you had a lot of people running out to Londonderry, and it just doesn't make any sense, and we really hope that you can come to the solution. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your comment. Comment or question?
Yeah, Mark Messina again. What are the next steps for the contract?
That's a very good question. I was planning to say I think the next steps are through this evening's discussion and what preceded this from dialogue we got directly from your council about what the issues are. I would anticipate that the board right now will make changes to the proposed long-term contract to have the board vote on clarifying what total school population means as far as the 10%, to add in language that allows this flexibility that was implemented in the long term, instead of being for 4 years, to be 5 years, so that it will take you through the MOU period, and that at that point of the opt-out, which would be the 6th year, that those students who are already in MOU satellite districts would be allowed to continue there if they so choose. So I think if I got that correctly, board, they would make those changes and send that to your board for them to consider at their meeting on the 17th. And then my understanding is that I'll look to this direction to say what happens after the 17th.
I think the question here, I think you've outlined the concerns that were presented tonight, and we understand that the Pinkerton board needs to consider those also. I think our board chair wanted to ensure from our board that those were the items and that our board wants to continue with that discussion to vote on those, not vote tonight, but to poll tonight to see that we do want to continue and discuss those items.
Thank you very much. I would like to poll the Hooksett School Board to see if we would like to move forward with negotiations to have a tuition agreement for the warrant article for this March for students entering in September of 2014, considering the items that have been brought here today with the changes that we've discussed. Cheryl, are you willing to move forward? Oh, yes.
Please describe how this poll varies from a vote. I see no reason that we don't vote on this and decide. And let me just say one other thing. I apologize to anybody that this meeting was misrepresented. This meeting was represented to us, and I'm not saying by the trustees, but by our own council and our council that's here tonight, as to be a decision-making meeting to come here and either leave with an agreement or not. And that's the way I came to this meeting. And now it appears that we are going to extend the process. And what we heard from Hooksett was they wanted an answer. I'm ready to have an answer tonight, but I want to know what I'd rather vote than poll.
So this was also the public's understanding, was that this was an action coming out of this meeting, not an extension.
And if I can just comment, I think the question was raised as to whether there could be a poll rather than a vote. My understanding from our discussions tonight is that the Pinkerton board still needs to vote on these additions. And so I think that's the reason why the chairs asked for a poll in terms of going forward and negotiating these conditions, because the Pinkerton board needs a full...
That's correct. We do not have a full board here on this diocese. We will be taking the information that we gathered here this evening and taking it back to the full board for discussion and vote.
And given that circumstance, I think it's prudent for the Hooksett board to take a poll that indeed they are committed to going forward, that these are the items that are going to be discussed and modified with the agreement through council, and so then the board can do a final.
If I may speak to the board members who are here, we do not have authority to clarify the language of a total school population. However, it seems like a reasonable item, so that is not something we have board authority to do. As to extending it for the 5th year, as opposed to the 4 years, we do have authority for that. As to extending it so that at the 6th year, those students who are already in a satellite district can remain there, we have authority for that. Am I correct? So I don't know how you do your business, I'll leave that to you. But as to those, I think, critical concerns, the board does have authority to represent to you tonight that they will make that change. The only change we did not discuss, because it was not raised in any way, is a clarification of the 10%. If that helps you.
I was just going to say, the concern I had, I want to summarize the changes, again, so everybody's on the same page. I know Phil had brought up about the freshman percentage of the class versus the holistic class. I'd like to try to clarify that either way. No, you're shaking your
We don't
head.
have authority for that.
Yeah.
The total student population.
But again, I guess not the authority, but if we can walk out of it with the fact that, I don't say folks are in agreement, but they think that's a reasonable option. I think our concern, Lisa, is that similar to David's point, but not quite the same. I want to be able to come out of here tonight to give our parents some confidence about next year. We're running out of time. I mean, we have budget concerns coming up that we have to address because, we have to get our budget in. I mean, our chairman of the budget committee is in the audience. So we have that concern and the concern of getting the 8th grade parents and getting these kids assigned. So and I, when I was here last week when they did the open house, I was talking to Mary and Harry, and again, time is of the essence here, so we just want to be able to come out of here and be able to give our parents something concrete. Because again, we keep saying, well, we'll wait, you're going to see, and people are reading the paper, and we need something solid to come back with. So that's my only concern.
And I think Jim has a question and comment, and then David.
I have 2 points. One, this meeting was clearly represented as bringing all the decision makers together so that we could either enter an agreement or not to bring closure to this issue or to bring a new relationship tonight. So I think that, and I'm not laying blame on anybody that they're not, but that was clearly the way that we have been portraying this meeting for the last week. And when I'm saying that I want to vote, clearly we can't vote on an agreement, I guess, unless we vote no. But I would rather vote whether we're going to continue or not versus polling. And that's what I was asking the question about. Because if we're going to continue, I think we need an official roll call vote here, because the continuing itself is a major issue on our board of whether we have reached the end of our timeline for this year. We have already said once that we have, and then we decided to have this meeting because there was some hope that we may come here and make a decision. Now we're facing more possible negotiation. So I think we need to be on the record and clear whether the Hooksett board wants to continue or whether we don't.
The one issue I'm a little concerned about, or maybe you can qualify this, we're talking about a poll, and I'm confused because Harry answered one of the citizens' questions, and I thought it was appropriate. He said that the question was about the MOU, and Harry admitted, they hadn't made a decision, yes or no. So I'm confused because what are we polling on? Are we polling that they continue to work on the tuition agreement as well as consider the MOU? Are we ruling the MOU out and now we're only considering the tuition agreement, or are we just considering the tuition, and the MOU now and the tuition agreement is out? So I think it should be very clear what we're either polling or voting on here, because there's a lot going on. Thank you.
Excuse me, Lisa. I wasn't done with my question when I was
Okay,
interrupted,
Linda?
so I
Okay.
apologize to butt back in, but
Linda,
sorry. One of the things that I wanted to say in my statement was that the Hooksett School Board is not exactly a fast-moving board, and you are running out of time. And this is an actionable meeting where you have the potential to make an actionable plan. So you've already conceded 3 different items to the Hooksett School Board. Why not stay, nail down that last one, and put a vote to this contract?
Today?
Today. That was the purpose of this meeting.
No, I will tell you that it was clearly represented to me as late as this today that this meeting was solely for discussion purposes. Our entire board is not here. We had representatives of our board to be here. So it was only intended to dialogue between the 2 boards. I don't know what was represented from the Hooksett side, but council had discussions that this was a meeting for discussion purposes only.
Okay, my information came from the Hooksett side.
Thank you. Question or comment?
I have a comment. My name is Carrie Hyde. I have 6 children in our school district right now. Well, 3 in the district, and 3 will be coming to the district later on, 2 in high school. I think that Pinkerton's a great opportunity for our students. We do like the Manchester opportunity as well. But I think that when Pinkerton goes back to your board and you redo your contract to submit to our board, you may also want to submit your own MOU for our board. Our board has trouble making decisions if you submit both of those at the same time, because when we vote in March and it gets, heaven forbid it does get voted down, you have your MOUs ready so that our students can come here. And what may happen is after the 5 years of MOUs, our parents are going to realize Pinkerton's a good choice, and we may be willing to do a 20-year contract. So it's just after being in a contract with Manchester and pulling out, now we're hesitant to get into another contract. But if they see it works without a long term, and then you offer a long term, you probably see it would work well.
Actually, your board had requested that of Pinkerton, and so we've had numerous rounds where an agreement was provided by your board to Pinkerton as to what they thought. It was sent back, it was brought back, it was brought back. So this latest round was, your board did request to say, will you please send us both the latest version of what Pinkerton would accept for a long-term contract, as well as what it would accept for MOU. So they have received that from Pinkerton. We are calling the MOU an enrollment agreement. Unlike perhaps other public school districts, Pinkerton is considered a unique entity called a public academy, which is in essence a private school which contracts with local districts to serve as the high school for those students. And because of that, the New Hampshire Department of Education must approve all contracts with the public academy. So in addition to voter approval, there also needs to be this layer of the State Board of Education must approve it, and it's a contract. And so for that reason, we're calling, although it's akin to the MOUs, Pinkerton has called it an enrollment agreement. So we have done what you're suggesting to help speed that along, and also to help your district in the event the voters should for some reason strike it down, that they know what alternative agreement might be in place. I will also say, having worked with Pinkerton, then the agreement that's been provided to your board is taking those pieces of the existing MOUs with the other districts that make sense for Pinkerton with some additional changes. There are portions of the long-term contract, such as about sharing student records and how student discipline is handled. Whether it's a short-term contract or a long-term contract, Pinkerton put in the same terms of its long-term contract and is what is in the long-term contract proposal. Likewise, with regard to tuition, Pinkerton, as a nonprofit entity, has a unique system of how it calculates tuition, where it sets a rate, and then if there are several years, I think every year for the past so many years, there's been a slight rebate back to the districts. And because of that calculation, unlike a public school district that works differently, those tuition terms are different. But your board did request and was provided that, so it will hopefully speed up that process so that you in the audience can have some greater assurance of where it will go.
Thank you. I have another question on top of your comment to the Hooksett School Board. Now, you don't call your an MOU, so I know that an MOU does not have to go to the voters, correct?
Just a couple points of clarification. One, yes, an MOU doesn't have to go to the voters from Hooksett's perspective. I know it has to be approved by the Department of Education because of the public academy. Just one point of distinction though, there's two different enrollment agreements / MOU that we're discussing. One is, in the event a tuition agreement doesn't pass the voters, there needs to be an agreement to handle the students currently attending Pinkerton or the 9th grade students for next year. That's one. That's like sort of a contingent enrollment agreement. What's also been discussed tonight is a separate enrollment agreement or MOU, which would be independent of any tuition agreement. So I just wanted to make that distinction because I think some people are discussing them as the same, and they're not.
And I will say that that option of having an MOU in place if the board strikes down the proposed long-term contract and doesn't even send it to the voters was first approached for us this evening, so we have not, the board has not provided a proposal for that because it only came about tonight.
Right, so you haven't given an MOU, but you have supplied something similar.
Yes, what it states is that this, which agreement is to be implemented only in the event that the Hooksett voters reject the proposed sending district tuition agreement between the district and the academy.
Okay,
so
I think that's something that the Hooksett board needs to share so that when we do vote, we see that in there, because if it's voted down, we know that there's something we can rely on afterwards. And these 8th graders who are worried about where they're going to go, they'll know that they still have an opportunity to go to Pinkerton if it's voted down. Because with this whole, the 10%, I think that's where everyone's worried about. But if they know that they're able to still come to Pinkerton because that falls into place. So I think that the Hooksett board needs to share everything with us, and I think they're lacking that. I thank Pinkerton very much for the opportunity to have this tonight.
And I will say, though, that the MOU is agreed in concept, but like the long-term sending district proposals, the written document itself has not yet been agreed upon. It's still under consideration by Hooksett. There are a couple of terms to the sending district contract that are a bit responsive to questions or comments that were posed earlier. One relates to having 2 schools of record maintained by the district. Pinkerton's contract, long-term contract proposal does request, although it has not been agreed upon yet, that the district agrees that during the term of this contract it will assign all high school students to Pinkerton unless the students opt out or unless a student, because of something called manifest educational hardship or best interest of the child, chooses to opt out. So that would, at least by the proposal presented by Pinkerton to the board, answer that question. The other question came about of included in the long-term district, this issue of, well, what if it happens at 5 years? Maybe can't we do this for a longer period? There is contract language proposed in this contract, as well as in all sending district, or many of them, that in 5 years, the boards can get together to talk about alternative language. However, if the alternative language doesn't work, then it remains what it is stated here, which is the after so many years it turns into the 10% opt-out. So because that's responsive to what you were asking, I thought I would point that out. David?
Yeah, as we're contemplating moving forward, I would just like to get some clarification. I think we have it. Whatever changes are made, I think it is the Board of Trustees' position that the 10% is firm for the last at least 4 years of the contract.
I think it amounts to about 2 years. Because if you get the flexibility that at the 6-year mark, any student who's already enrolled in another school gets to stay in that school, you may not be able to meet the 10%, so we're going to have to clarify that. So then it would be, they would have 3, so you figure the sophomore gets to, the freshman gets to finish the 4 years, so it's probably just the last 2 years that the opt-out jumps in, if I'm correct in my understanding of what your wishes are. Right. So we would need to clarify that. That was not in the draft.
Yeah, we need to talk about that because I looked at in the 5th year we have 60 slots. And I think we just went over that. If we use them all up, we can't use any more until we gain slots, until those people would graduate out. So I think at the most we're not clear on that, but I think it is clear to say, or maybe the trustees could say, it seems as though the 10% number is rock solid for Pinkerton. And if it is different than that, I think that's the movement that might make a difference for us. And I understand if that is their standard because they have it in other contracts. It seems as though there are some concessions in how we get there, but we have to get there. And I just want to make it, is that a fair statement of your position?
Harry?
I believe, again, your assumption is correct, at least my interpretation of it is that all those who are involved in other schools through MOUs and however you place them, they stay in those schools. And by the time we get all of those schools evacuated of your students, it's going to be in year 7 or 8. And then only does the 10% kick in.
But I think in fairness to your answer, David, is the opt-out a important thing for Pinkerton to eventually get to? Not having a crystal ball to see where life is at in 8 or 10 years from now, the answer is yes. Pinkerton, although we have spoken tonight about Hooksett students and the interests of the Hooksett School District, Pinkerton is a compilation of many sending school districts. And it is very important to Pinkerton to treat all of those school districts and all the students who come in from whatever district they come in on equal parity. And because there is that opt-out in other schools, which is there for a reason so that Pinkerton can manage programming, facilities, who they hire, and all those reasons why it helps them to manage it from a budget perspective, I think you can foresee that even with an MOU in 5 years from now, unless the world has changed, there would be a 10% opt-out.
Yeah,
Am
so
I accurate in that, Brenda?
Yes, I think you're very accurate, and I think that what I'm sensing here is that the Board of Trustees has learned some new information. We understand that the definition and calculation must be worked out, and it seems to me that some of the things that we've indicated that we're willing to do presents an opportunity to the Hooksett Board to take a look at the final language and in their hometown, with their hometown crowd, be able to make an informed decision. But I understand, I guess, from their procedure that they have to make a motion to continue the negotiations to their December 17th meeting. If I'm right, if I've summarized that correct, I'm sure that Linda can get the information that she needs to get to council fairly quickly so that the decisions can be made at their December 17th meeting.
Does that help?
And I'm just looking for that clarification that however that is described, it seems as your will, in the end, whatever year we calculate it to be, it will be 10%. That the board, the Pinkerton trustees, is not willing to move from 10% to any other percentage or any other number. Is that a fair statement as we stand here?
I think that's very fair, because if we concede that event, then we have to now renegotiate all our other contracts. And they're at varying stages in those contracts as to how far they progressed in those contracts. We've been trying to be fair, very fair with all of our sending towns, that whatever concessions that we make to the new school coming into our system, that we offer that same concession to all the other sending districts. And that poses quite a problem. And as I had mentioned, earlier there was a mention that there was 40 some odd students that are going to Londonderry. Our contracts with other sending districts also has a clause in it that restricts us from receiving other students other than contracting students. It's limited to only 75 students. This year alone, we had over 150 applications for those 75 positions. And some of them were from your own hometown of Hooksett. We could have accepted all those 46 that Londonderry had we not had those restrictions in those contracts. So we're bound by what those contracts say. We want to be fair to you, but we also want to be fair to the sending towns that are currently here.
Yes?
I just want to say, Harry, I appreciate your comments. And I just want to give you a little bit of a perspective, just from the shoes of a Hooksett representative. And with regards to the other contracts, similar to like we're getting ready here to do a poll to see where the board sits. I just would recommend, and it's your board, you're going to do what you're going to do, but you may consider polling the other descending districts just to ask them, is it time to remove the restriction, the 10%? Because you may find that they have such a great experience with Pinkerton that they're ready for that move, that they're ready for you to compete with all these surrounding districts and prove that Pinkerton has what it takes to compete in this new age of declining enrollments in charter schools. There was a second point, I'm sorry, it slipped my mind because it was a good one, but I'll think of it and I'll tell you at the end. Thank you.
It looks like we have one final comment or question, and I will say it had been my hope. Oh, I'll let Cheryl speak in a minute. We'll let Cheryl address them. We'll go to you, and then we had hoped to wrap up at 9, so we'll have this be our final comment, and we'll let the Hooksett board have comments, and then any final comments from either board before we close, and you can continue with your
Thank
vote. You. Cheryl, you wanted to comment?
A quick question. I just want to make sure I understand exactly what, how we're going to end up possibly wrapping up here. I think we're ready to say whether we're going to move forward with the things that have been discussed already. And I just want to be clear that if we decide here that yes, we would like to continue, does that mean that we are going to see something by the 17th so that we can make a decision on the 17th for the contract? Because that's for me, that's a very critical point, because I'd like to get this under wraps.
I think that the board, the entire board had previously authorized those 2 changes.
Yeah, through this whole process, once we started, my board is on standby. So we've been calling special meetings. As soon as we get any information from your board, we try to act on it immediately within the 24-hour period as soon as I can get the board together. So yeah, we're very cognizant of your timeline, and we want to work with you as much as possible.
Thank you. Then at this time, I would like to make a motion that we continue with the negotiations with the things that have been discussed, that both council have in front of them, and to so that we can have something prepared for our 17th meeting.
Second.
And I'm sorry, I recognize the motion, and the board needs to vote on that. I just a point of clarification, so council is clear going forward. The 2 items were already discussed by the Pinkerton board, and we appreciate that. On the clarification of the 10%, there were a number of different discussions of the clarifying the 10%. I believe discussion was of making it 10% of the freshman class, but then there was also just clarification in terms of the 10% of the overall population. And we, as council, we just want to have some guidance as to where the board is, whether we want to be looking at 10% of the freshman class, which I think gives us the flexibility to get to where we want to go, or if Pinkerton board is thinking of something else, because we obviously don't want to go off and have council discuss and then have some understanding. And I think the comment here was that the 10% of freshman class seems to be more clear from the Hooksett board's perspective.
Well, I can speak, since we only have a small amount of the Pinkerton board here, we would be unable to speak on behalf of the board as a whole. So all we can do is take your request, take it under consideration, and get back to you with a proposal. But
we'd like to know what they're, and I think we do now. Yeah.
10% of the freshman class is what they're asking.
Because we did talk about a lot.
You have something, David?
Discussion of the motion to the board of Hooksett. I think that we've had a very good discussion here, and I think that there have been some concessions and understandings made by the Pinkerton board. But as we approached this from the very beginning, it was always the 10% that was the problem. And I respect their limit is 10%, but I think we need to come to the reality that that's why this board has not accepted this contract, and that they are not going to change that. We may determine how it's calculated, that may tweak it a little bit, but fundamentally nothing has changed in the big picture of why we have, rejected this idea really twice now. So I would urge that we bring closure here, and we maybe revisit this for the following 15-16 year, when we have more time to really vet these things out, include the public, and see if really we can work within that 10%. Because right now, I don't have a feeling as a Hooksett school board member that that's going to work for us.
Yes, John.
I just want to add to that, my Alzheimer's kicked back and I remember that second point. All I was going to say is right now, Hooksett's in a position we're looking for long-term partners. Pinkerton Academy is very favorably looked upon in our community. You have a lot going for you. You got a lot of people that are attending here that have so much positive to say about this place and everything about it. The educational facility here. We struggle with things like transportation, but that's our job to handle those things and make sure the kids have equal access to the major anchor schools, which we're proposing that you be one of them. As David said, the sticking point on this board, which is where we rejected this tuition agreement before, and nothing has changed. We have some concessions, as David said, but nothing has really changed for the Hooksett voter. It's unfortunate, but I don't think it means the end of a relationship. I just think it means the continued fine-tuning of what that long-term relationship is, because I think if we rushed into something that upset the Hooksett voters, like I said before, I think that would be a detriment to our long-term relationship. It may be a good short-term fix, but to our long-term relationship, I think it would be a detriment. Thank you.
Yes, Phil.
Still on, that's a good thing. So I guess my thought process is, obviously we came here tonight looking to be in better shape than we were. There were actually 2 items. One of them was taken care of right away, which was the language that was in the MOUs, because obviously if you want to be our anchor, you have to take every kid, right? You can't pick and choose. And there was 1 clause, so that was one thing that went away, which was great. Along these lines, like I say, I think we've added a year tonight and talked about some other items. And we talked about the fact that prior to the meeting here, at the end of the day, I guess our job is to get the best agreement that we can. And then at the end of the day, let the voters decide. We've heard that a lot lately where people are just like, get it done. We should have the ability to vote it up or vote it down. So based on the items we have tonight, and I was a vocal opponent in our meetings, that the 10% bothered me. Again, at the end of the day, everybody should walk away from a negotiation feeling they got a little something. So I feel like I have gotten a little something. Hopefully the Pinkerton folks feel like they've gotten a little something. So I'm in a decent place.
Yes, John.
Just want to add a clarification to something Phil said. I may not have read the contract completely, understood it, but I don't believe we ever had that second item that was a showstopper for us in the contract. Council. So what we were talking about is Pinkerton had an objection to the MOUs basically restricting children that could come into the MOU schools, but I don't believe that was ever part of the agreement that we reviewed. I thought that was just comments.
We did not know, Pinkerton did not know until the MOUs became a public record through the Londonderry School District that the reservation of rights allows them to pick the students, whereas Pinkerton, as the anchor school, would take all. And there was a concern voiced to your council. So you are correct that it was voiced, but it was never put into the agreement.
Great, thank you.
And if there being no further discussion, I'll call this to a vote. All those in favor of moving forward? Absolutely. Leanne, are you prepared to do a roll call vote? Would you like a microphone? Okay.
Cheryl Baxter?
Yes.
Phil Demo?
Yes.
John Stars?
No.
David Burrow?
No.
Yes. It was a 3-2 vote to proceed.
Now, the gentleman has been standing very patiently in the back of the room, and I'd like to turn our attention to him as our last comment or question for the evening before each board closes.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is David Dorazano from Hooksett. In my professional career as a director of IBM, I'm in contract negotiations constantly with worldwide, global corporations. What I've seen here tonight with the concessions made on some of the very important sticky points, it appears to me that Pinkerton has waived their 10% rule for now up to 5 years, based on some of the changes in language that the board was able to verbally agree to and approve. If we are to delay this yet one more year, years 8 and 9 and 10, or perhaps somewhere around the 9-10 with the extension, we're not going to be in any different place than we are right now. This is, in fact, a very historic event. This is the historic event that gives the Hooksett School Board the opportunity to give some stability to the town of Hooksett in terms of real estate. It gives the school board an opportunity to put some stability in the parents and the children's minds as to where they're going to go. It gives the Hooksett School Board the historic event of keeping their students together and in a sense of community, going to a single school. They're not going to concede 10% in years 9, 10, and beyond, right? It's just not going to happen. And by year 2018, when our MOUs or our agreements with Manchester have come to pass, they're going to be an opportunity for us to continue a longer-term contract and negotiation such that the town overall will have the ability to seek out the best opportunity for their children. I just want everybody to just listen to what the town is asking. It seems like you could not really get a better negotiated set of terms back and forth here. And certainly now is the time. Nothing's going to change in a year's time. It really is not. They're not going to change from 10% because they can't, right? It is a negotiation. Anything can happen. It's not set in stone, but there's not going to be a difference between now and then. We've got basically what we need. Let's move forward. And I applaud the Hooksett School Board for proceeding to the 17th date with the written, formalized contract terms. And I thank you all as well for having this event. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments. In closing, is there any closing comment that the board would like to make? And likewise, in closing, any comment? I will close by referring to one. Oh, yes, Carrie.
I just want to
our
thank,
board chair.
I just want to thank the Hooksett School Board for taking this opportunity to come and meet us face to face. There's nothing better than to see who we're really talking to. It's kind of hard than just looking at print. So again, I want to take my hat off to the school board coming here for the leadership of your superintendent and for the audience tonight for the decorum that you possessed out there, and the questions were very intriguing. So thank you also very much.
Thank you as well as those in the audience. Whether it's a long-term contract or a short-term enrollment agreement, Pinkerton has expressed their interest in being the school for your students, and I think your school board is doing all it can to explore the various options for you. So I thank them for their attendance, questions, and input tonight. I think we've made some gains, and thank Pinkerton's board and for all of you. Thank you. It is nice to meet you.